He was a poet, and he was a philosopher, and he was considered a madman. He talked to angels. He drew them. His prints are now regarded as some of the most important and difficult to obtain in the world. He made up an entire philosophy to explain another entire philosophy, written in a secret language. In one of those poems, he said, "Nature hath no line, but imagination has." Nature hath no line, capitalized, but imagination has. William Blake. William Blake is studied by literary critics and historians, of course. He was often quoted by Bateson as well. As we see into what this man saw as he drew angels, that he swore he was drawing what he saw. Now, we actually have examples that are far less transcendental than that, but are of the same order. And it's only been recently with the neuroscience and neurophysical sciences that they figured out. For instance, just take this chair. And you probably see a square edge on this chair, is that right? Somewhat square on both sides. More common example that's used in psychology would be a nice tight wooden table. And the thing is that if you actually saw it the way it looks, and by the way, cameras really help in this, and those of you who have a digital camera can play this experiment. And you can go click, 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 and it won't look square from certain angles. It'll have this kind of look. We all know that when we've taken the picture and our knee is as big as our head, right? We're sitting there going like that, and we go, my knee. And yet, when we were looking at the person, we didn't see that huge knee. And this same kind of experience, this constancy of shape, is found in other parts of our experience. There is no black or white in nature. I hate to break it to you so early in the morning. It's yellow and blue. Fundamentally, in terms of cones and receptors and rods in the eye, and then the translations that take place into the visual system, it's yellow and blue that are opposites. And yet, what do we see? Well, now, of course, there's black, because we've created it artificially, clearly. Well, at least clearly for me, at my angle, I can see some black here. Yet, that, if you go into nature, if you go out for a walk, even in the darkest of the dark of nights, up here in the mountains where there aren't the street lights, where now there's the moon, but sometimes the month there's not the moon, even then in the stars, it's going to be a gray and a darkness, but not a black. And so we find ourselves in a very interesting situation. That the world isn't how it appears, yet we're pretty glad that it does. I don't know if you know about the surrealist poets and also the surrealist painters. Dali being probably the most flamboyant example, certainly not my favorite. Magritte being another one, the man who, he had a painting of a man looking out a window, but the window was a painting kind of things, tricks of reality. And my friends, this was when I was younger, more flamboyant perhaps, and we were all going to go out to a concert and stuff, but one of our friends, we'd gotten together at their apartment, she'd agreed to cook, and she was going to cook a fish. And she had picked up the fish from the kitchen in order to turn it over to, skin it or whatever you do with fish. And she realized how surreal it was. And she walks out into the living room where my friend John is. She goes, John, and turns around. And, this woman in an evening gown, by the way, with a fish, and John goes, ah! Because he didn't have categories to put it in. It was a frightening scene. I'm going, that was Devin and a fish. And we encounter those moments in life that challenge our understanding. Scientists have this much more often than they're willing to admit. The platypus, mammal, amphibian, or just a mistake. And the transgender that we know about now. And you go, well, wait a minute, our categories are destabilizing. And the thing is, we can't not, given the nature of our biology, think the categories are in the world. But I'm hoping by now you're beginning to realize that nature has no line, but imagination has. Now, the postmodern philosophers, particularly of the French persuasion, would have you believe that this means anything goes. I have published a book. It proves that reading is bullshit. Read my book. The idea that there is no ground, that any philosophy can compete with any philosophy. It's all relative. Heaven knows, anything goes. I hope I've started to suggest yesterday that that's not the case, in fact. That there is a great deal of variety of what one can do with some basic distinctions, and that those distinctions are so fundamental that they are part of how the mechanisms, and I'm using that word deliberately, the mechanisms of language allow us to connect with the world. They are behind the screen, if you will. They're not open to question. You can't decide to stop using perceptual positions. And if you do, other people will fill them in where they go, because they're so fundamental to our understanding and our survival. Remember, language points at certain kinds of experience. There's you and there's me. Well, in Ron's case, there's me and there's me. Right, okay, there we go. And we might go do something. And so we have a marker in our language, this thing called verbs, all those verbs, to let us know if we're doing something. We have another set of markers that let us know whether we've done them, whether we will do them, because we bind time. And we're doing something with something, and this something out there could be a something. Could be a place we're going to. Could be some sort of information we're seeking. Could be some activity we're engaged in. And all of this is going on all the time. And we attend to some of it more than the other. Now, this has given people the impression, and when they began to come up with these ideas, that perhaps that these were filters. They were like sunglasses. You put them on and you see the people, and everything else kind of fades, gets all fuzzy in the background. You put on a different pair, and you don't see the people, you see the room. And you do so on and so on through all the different permutations. This is a misunderstanding, because vision is active. See, the idea of a filter is that it's passive, that all this information is coming in and you're deleting and generalizing and distorting that information. And that is the universal modeling principles we use in our field. However, it ignores what the frog's eye teaches the frog's brain. That is that certain different items in the world that we are, by our particular, what is it? Just the activation system, particular activation, we're actively seeking, with our neurology, those aspects of experience we want, just like the frog and all the other mammals and so forth are seeking their bit of experience that will make it possible for them to survive and perhaps thrive. So it's a lot less of a filter. Well, as I've indicated, I have some literary leanings, and I was reading John Berger, wonderful, wonderful writer, who did a series for BBC years ago called Ways of Seeing, which is still worth seeing, in as much as he shows that the paintings of different eras and even the photographs in Playboy have all these other messages they're carrying, besides the obvious ones you're thinking of, have all these other messages, and that the way the scene is set, we don't even notice it. In that sense, we're the fish in the water. We don't realize how looking at a scene and having it look a certain way creates certain experiences, just like we create the table as having square edges and the chair as stable. Even as we walk around it from different angles, it should look different, but it doesn't. Because we're, in our minds, you realize how brilliant that is? You know the Parthenon is not a rectangle, don't you? Okay, the Parthenon, the Greeks, they had this cold over 2,000 years ago. Just take the back of the book and say that's a rectangle for the Parthenon. And the edges here are exactly flat, right? Or as much so as any book publisher can do it. Well, the actual Parthenon is curved so many slight degrees around the edges here, because if it do that, then the eye will see it as squarer. And we think they were uneducated. Now, their architecture actually accounted for that, because they'd realized, remember, these people didn't have television. They had a lot of time to look at stuff. Okay? So that way of the interaction between our set of perception and categorizing systems with the world. Well, take a moment here and read from Berger, because he nails it, I think. He says, one does not see through writing, and you could also say speaking, onto reality as through a clean or dirty window pane. Words are never transparent. Remember the idea of a filter. He says they create their own space, a space of experience, not that of existence. And what experience are they creating? Or what experience are they bringing up? It's the experience that we've already marked on our map by the amount of experience that we have, the number of distinctions that we make as we interact with the world. So our space, like the example I gave yesterday of somebody who doesn't do much exercise or activity, their space of experience is not very extensive. It's not that they're filtering out activities, is that they don't have those marks on their map inside, so when they go and look at the world, they don't have that same thing. It's wonderful. You watch people during the Olympics. I know we have one of those coming up soon. And you got the guy, and he's sitting on the couch, and he opens the beer, and he watches one of these guys run, in a 4-minute mile or something, or leap and turn and stuff like that. And he imagines in his head, and he goes, yeah, I could do that. Way to go. Our team. Because he's inhibited the connection between what he sees, and by the way, he does in fact do it in his head. There's all this new research in neuroscience about mirror neurons. And the mirror neurons, when you see something, you actually do it in your head. It is monkey see, monkey do. The fix is in, as we say in Chicago. And, this is a very interesting thing, and the brain can't tell the difference if there's a black plastic line around the picture of the person doing it. Television. People are wondering if television promotes certain kinds of behavior. Well, the fix is in. Yes, it does, because people will see stuff, they will activate the mirror neurons and do it in their head. The thing is that when you're a kid, the connection between the mirror neurons in near your limbic system and your long muscle neurons is completely open. So kids see stuff and do it right away. So when a parent says, well, if your friends jumped off a cliff, would you? The kid's going, yeah, I would, because there's no inhibition. What we learn as an adult is to inhibit, when we see something, our large muscle groups. But we still play it in our head. And when we see somebody fall down and we have a feeling about that, we go, oh, we actually played it to the point where what we saw affected us enough that it actually overrid our natural tendency not to go from the mirror neurons, but also to go out to the larger neuron and long muscles and actually do the behavior. Yeah. You know what this says about mental rehearsal, don't you? Yeah, we now have evidence that the idea of mental rehearsal works. And mental rehearsal, the idea is if you have 3 or 4, 5 examples, say, of shooting baskets, this is one they have done enough studies on that we know it's the case, shooting baskets, then you will remember which one was the best performance because you have such a small group to select from. Then you can sit down, close your eyes, and rehearse that again, replay that memory in the mirror neurons. And what you're doing is you're deepening, to use one of the theories of neurons, you're deepening the basin of attraction. There's a neural net that's been created for that particular experience. And rather than being rather shallow, is by rehearsing it and rehearsing, you make it deeper. So that then when you go to actually do the behavior again live, that you have deepened that particular set of neuron connections, and then when it goes out to large muscle groups, you can do it better. Same thing about watching somebody else and stepping into them and becoming them. And I did this, and I said, I did this. I should, I'm the trainer. But I mean, I've got it. I mean, I've gotten it before. I step in and pretend I'm John Grinder, you know. Well, he's actually much smoother than that. But, you know, that's a way of learning. But when I was learning golf, this guy was teaching me, and there's a whole thing, if you know about the Feldenkrais method, about educating the neurons. So you want to do the motions in such a way with attention. Even Arnold Schwarzenegger realized that. He said 10 repetitions, he was a bodybuilder, 10 repetitions with awareness is worth 100 without awareness. Well, talking about developing these connections. And so the golf thing was to do the golf stuff with complete attention to what you were doing. And then once I'd done that, a putt, you know, a swing, whatever it was, then I'm out there with the pro because we're modeling golf and doing some stuff, and he's looking at me and he goes, pretend you're me. And this is a guy when we started out that morning, and there were all these duffers, if you will, out there swinging and the driving and stuff. And then this guy goes up there and he swings, and there's this crack, as you know, that sweet, they call you that sweet crack as the ball is hit. And everybody looks down the range and goes, it was pro on the range, you know. And so I did that, and damn if I didn't get some of that, right? Because I had the underlying neurology for the skill, and I'd been around this guy enough that I had a strong representation of what to step into. So unconsciously, more than consciously, conscious, remember 7 plus or minus 2, or is it plus or minus 2? Now that's chunks. You know, you can remember a lot of stuff when you chunk it. That's what we're doing here. But unconsciously, I could step in and get a lot more of how he was breathing and how he stood and the kind of things he'd say to himself before. He's a great guy. You know, and so I could do all that and put myself in that mindset with that neurology inside. Right. Because I had the distinctions. Because I had the awareness that if I stuck with myself, that's what I'd get. But in fact, that I knew that if I stepped into a real other with that representation, if I stepped over from one perceptual position to the other, that there were certain learnings that I could and would and did get. And at that point, what happened? I changed my career. No, what happened was, as I made more lines, I made more distinctions, my game got better, so then I could bring that back from the other into myself as even more distinctions about how to play this game with the stick and the little white ball and little holes and flags. Oh yes, and the terrace lawn. Right, yes.
And it goes like that. So we can't stop doing distinctions, so we cannot stop.
You're right, we can't stop doing distinctions, but we have a tendency to do the distinctions we've already done.
Okay.
Right.
The individual.
They're familiar, yeah. The other thing, so thank you for that we tend to do the distinctions we've done, and we could expand our set. The other thing I want to bring to your attention, and I'm going to use Diltz's mapping here in a semi-approved way, is if you take what I've done with it, and we say the environment is sensory-based, yeah? So this is sensory-based here. And we say that by successive orders, we're becoming more and more abstract. That was my thing yesterday about I have a suit, I have a shirt, I have a belief. There's no belief there. But we act like there is. Nature hath no line. We act like there's things in this world called belief by the acts of imagination. So if you see these as successive acts of imagination, tying time together to make a strategy, holding an image in mind of what you want, it's never going to be exactly what you want. Never. But close enough that it gives us direction, motivation, and when we get there, it's sufficiently close, we go, yeah, what a real accomplishment. And to the idea of values, which are, of course, are kind of generalization, beliefs, another kind of generalization, to who we think we are, which can either be very enlivening, or as we know, it can be crippling for someone. All an idea, an abstraction. And spirit, well, spirit, if you look at anything about spirit, and I mean anything, the way we understand that is always by metaphor. Whether it's God as an elderly man, or whether it's by energy waves, which we've seen when we see waves on the surface of water, or by wind, or by sound, or the feeling of love that we have for someone that we just can't believe we love them so much. And by an active imagination, we say, well, if I've got this, it's got to be in the universe. And no less than Bateson said, if mind is anywhere, mind is everywhere. People say, are computers intelligent? And Bateson says, as long as the operator is. So what we're looking at is a cycling. I'll just give you a moment to absorb that one. So we're constantly cycling between the sensory-based and then by different transforms, what it implies about the abstract. At the abstract up here, we have black and white, good and bad, quantity and quality. These are very abstract concepts, which we then reapply to experience. We go, well, you know, it's not black and white. Now, let's make this more relevant. Back to meta-programs. Some people, their decision processes are highly digital. Now we're using a scientific word, so it's okay. They're highly digital. And in that sense, and we hear this, and Steve has most recently very much nailed this to the floor by showing the structure of judgment. The structure of judgment is that you get certain sensory information and you evaluate it relative to who you think you are. And if your evaluation system, which is abstract, and you apply it, is black and white, digital, then you'll make a judgment. That's good, that's bad. Now, that's a very important thing to do as a quick hash, you know? If you understand our neurology and what our ancestors way back faced, then the idea of food, not food, danger, not danger. Hey, baby. You know, it's these various things that we had to, these various decisions we had to make in a hurry. And we as a species survived. Whatever your opinions of evolution are, we know that if you breed racehorses for a few generations, 50, 100 years, you get a substantially different horse. Think of the thousands of years that we know civilizations have been around, and that it rewarded the ability to make decisions quickly. So the idea of being able to sort things, digital is very important. But then, of course, we can reapply it at any level. My belief system good, your belief system bad. And or versa versa, right? So the thing is, you can hear this again in people because they will use digital language. They apply this mental construct to a world that is completely analog. With a little digital thrown in. You had a question, Ron?
Yeah, is digital and analog, is that considered a meta program or just components thereof?
That's what I'm getting at here, is where does a meta program come from? What makes a meta program? I made the case yesterday that the very first way to appreciate a meta program is that it's connected to our biology. It's a grammatical item. And I'm beginning to make the case now that there's certain primary distinctions. Remember what I talked about yesterday, that a meta program, to qualify as a meta program, has to have a perceptual prime. You can't reduce it into anything smaller. And by acts of imagination, we have abstracted out certain primes, like black, white. Now, we get a little encouragement from nature, you know, dark blue and the light colors. And we then run with that, and then we reapply that to other areas. Yeah.
To look at metaprogram, do we separate those with the dense levels and those with the non-dense level, or we can just mix them, put them together?
Well, what I've said, and I'll go over it again, is that the meta programs thread. That is that we're in an environment and we go out, we're going to go out to dinner, and I turn to Ron and I say, well, where would you like to go? And Ron says, I don't like sushi. Right? Now, maybe that's digital, maybe that's not. Maybe it's just reducing the class. But the thing is that we went the universe of where to go, and he applies a value, and he gives me not, right? And he's abstracted the idea that there's this whole group of stuff called, you know, raw fish, of which he's not going to partake. And that sense of reapplying it to the environment is the way in which this moves around in here. That is, the meta programs are not slid in. I know I wrote them there, but they go this way. So that someone goes to a political rally now, almost impossible not to hear a digital sort. You're pro this, you're anti that. Or you're both pro something, but it's opposite, because they're trying to find language to sound more positive. And we can hear, again, neurolinguistic, which is why I'm going on about this. We can hear in that language that sort on such a basic level, and we can notice how often the person applies that to their environment, applies that to themselves and other people's behavior in terms of choosing. So, you know, so they would say, for instance, many people would say of the French postmodernists, muddle-headed thinkers, you know, bad thinking, good thinking, clear thinking, moral courage thinking, and that these form different kinds of opposites which aren't there. Take all the different kinds of thinking, or all the different kinds of behavior, or all the different kinds of feelings. What do we talk about negative states? You've heard people talk about negative states? Well, where's the sign? We could say behind every behavior is a positive intent, but I want to go stronger than that. It's that every behavior, including every feeling, is useful in some context. Thank you. There are no negative states. There are no positive states. Now, if I'm yeah, good. I'm going to rattle a couple of you this morning. Now, if I'm rattling you a little bit, The rattling, the uneasiness you're feeling is the fact that you use that digital metaprogram enough that it unsettles you to hear somebody making that kind of assertion. And of course, that would make me wrong because the person would apply the digital metaprogram to it. I just want to get you to how twisty how quickly this can get. And also on such a simple thing as digital and analog. Analog being a continuous movement, digital being, again, you can also communication's redundant. You can see it in the person's behavior as well, smooth movements. Steve Andreas and I just did a seminar on categories and scope. And scope is a lot more about analog. So Steve's up there, he's like a Tai Chi master, and he does know Tai Chi, and he studied with one of the masters. So he's up there is doing these movements, and like that, and then I come up and I go, pew, 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 pew. Now, we can joke about it, we learn to do each other's, which I want you to know is a meta-awareness that I'm endeavoring to instill in you. Most people are very attached to their categories. They're very attached to their metaprogram distinctions. They know theirs are right. If they sort digitally. So the metaprograms affect all the other metaprograms. If they don't sort digitally, if they sort analogically, they go, well, yours has some merit, but I kind of walk another side of the street. You hear that where people are more going, yeah, well, he does his thing, I do mine. In that language, you begin to hear more of a respect to the analog. So sometimes the neurolinguistic cue is in the words, good and evil, black and white. And sometimes it's not, right and wrong. Sometimes it's more of a, well, he does his thing, that's good, he does mine. And you see this, and you go, oh, that's more analog kind of sorting. As if, well, there's this and there's this. Digital, yeah. Again, I'm reviewing what we did a whole day yesterday. I'm moving it forward, and I'm going to pause here and take some questions. Nope. That's one of the reasons we're taping. Bless you. And again.
I've got a little bit of an intellectual handle on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I recognize my meta programs are anchored to understanding the flow the other way around, like logical level, sort of anchored to that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm having real difficulties, frankly, thinking of examples of how this works in my life. And I think it's the words. I'm having difficulty finding words. This morning when we were talking about filters,
Mm-hmm.
last night I was searching for words to describe this
Yeah.
way of, and that's what I'm having a bit difficulty. I'm wanting to picture it. A filter I can see.
Right, and that's the thing. Sometimes analogies, well, in the words of H.L. Mencken, for every problem there is a clear and simple solution, and it is wrong. And the idea there being that we reach for the most convenient analogy or metaphor, and that when you do that, you can get something quick, and maybe you need to do something quick. But when we get into exploring how we put our experience together, we might want to hesitate a little bit and take a moment and see if there isn't something that would allow us to do that much more. In other words, don't reach for the first tool in the box. Kind of make that connection between what it is that you've got and what it is you want to do. Now, what I would suggest is something along the lines of my drawing yesterday. And it's difficult because, again, you start with just, in a space, you start with a point and realize the effect a point has. And then if you go, well, what if we made that like that? And how does that do? And then what if you imagine this whole thing then became blue? Well, as long as there's the white and the blue dot, we have all these things like here, there, foreground, background, and all these distinctions that we make, both in space and time and in language. And if it went all blue again, which I won't do, but if it went all blue, all the same shade, the distinctions disappear again. So we're talking about difference, and this is Bateson again. Bateson said, the difference that makes the difference. He wasn't just amusing himself. He was saying the only thing that gets onto our maps is difference. It's not energy. It's not something. It's information. It has no weight. It has no mass. In fact, it has nothing at all except an act of imagination. And that as we make more differences in whatever area it is, whether it's how to tend our children or the different sounds of a foreign language. One of my first encounter, we were talking yesterday about your living in Asia, my first encounter with Chinese, because I was teaching refugees, this was back a few years. I was a student, I was teaching refugees on the weekend as a volunteer project, and I realized they could not get the sounds of English. They were just having so much trouble learning. I said, well, I'm not getting how difficult this is. I'll set myself an equally difficult task. I'll learn a little Chinese. Well, not only that, they find this out, and they trot me out an actual Chinese teacher who was among the students. It's about this tall. And we go over to her place, and we sit down, and she goes, first lesson, she goes, get this right. Shui, 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 shui. I think the last one didn't quite hit the note. And I go, shui. She goes, no, and does it again. Shui, 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 shui. And I'm going, shui. This goes about 3 or 4 more times I won't bother you with. And she goes, all different. And I went, I'm in trouble now. Now, what I did and what I'm about to show you, in a manner of speaking, is exactly applicable to all the stuff we're going to do in the next couple of days. When I realized that these were different sounds, there were 5, it was Cantonese. Turns out they actually have 8 tones, but I tried for 5. We took colored pieces of paper. I have instead here the markers, and put colored pieces of paper and had the different color, and also I did spatial dislocation because I can make the distinctions in the visual field. I can see this is blue and it's here. I can see it's red and it's further over there. I can see it's green, it's over there. And then she said each sound and touched a color. And then when I said a sound, any one of them, she'd put it on the color. So it was a positive feedback system. I mean, a couple times she said to touch the table and go, nah, you're not even close. But most of the time, I might make the wrong sound she wanted, but the right sound somewhere else. And by utilizing what I could see, I began to build up more distinctions about what I could hear. Translation across rep systems, a simple application. In the same way, the fact that I know my own body well enough, the Feldenkrais method is something that puts you in touch with your neurology, your balance, and being sensitive to your movements. So that then when I stepped into the golf pro and assumed the same posture that the golf pro did, then I could make certain inferences about how he was using his body differently, most of them unconscious. But a number of them I go, yeah, his shoulder's in a different place. I wouldn't have thought of doing that. Of course, it works for golf, whereas what I was doing didn't. So in that way, we learn from each one. Sometimes, though, we forget. I can't get my people to do what I want. Do you have an NLP technique for that? I said, yes, I do. Treat them as if they're actually people. And they go, do you have another technique? Well, and what this states in some ways is somebody who's, and especially those, I've talked to a couple of you that do work with engineers in your consulting. And engineering, whoa, these guys and gals can structure a project, and they know where the parts go, and they can problem solve with these very good methods. And then they go and explain them to the human beings. Well, the other human beings. If the other human beings are engineers, they've got half a chance, right? But because of shared language, shared distinctions. If they're not, well, then they need to make more distinctions in self and other. And they need to make more distinctions in when to talk about information and when to talk about things that people care about. And so now we're beginning to speak about how you develop a meta program. And so a number of NLPers around the world now are professional executive coaches. And a large part of what they're doing is teaching criteria, values, rapport, ways of listening, so that these people, men and women, professionals, who do know their craft, do know their work, can expand their ability to engage people in the same vision and mission and change in the world that they want to produce. Anwar.
How do we categorize people who use the logical method? Here there are certain types of method programs like math, two-word.
Away from, yeah.
The logical method, how, I don't know, I understood it, but still I know how.
Well, I'll tell you that there is, and you're going right into what I want to do next, that there is not widespread agreement on what is and is not a metaprogram. There's a central set everybody agrees on, and this is a set that was organized by Leslie Cameron Bandler, working alongside, I believe that Dilts was there, Robert Dilts. I know that Brian Vanderhorst was there and was also working with it, and several others. I know some people, such as John Grinder, said there are no metaprograms. And well, he would say, well, there are programs that are meta other programs. And to give too much attention to a few of these is to misunderstand the nature of hierarchies and neurological systems. He's a logical formalist, and John has a point. And a number of other people taking a different turn on it said, yeah, but you know, it's really useful to hear whether somebody's doing I, or you, and whether they're associated, dissociated, whether they're talking in terms of the activity and the things, more engineering, or talking in terms of the people and the relationships. These are significant things to pick out in a hurry. So that was kind of just by fiat was decided that they'd start teaching this, because Leslie was very interested, but they thought at the time that it was the structure of personality, which is why Tad James and Wyatt Woodsmall's book is called Timeline Therapy and the Structure of Personality, because at that time, Leslie and the people around her thought that this might have some insight into personality. Now, they since discarded that idea. At the time, though. And there were very complicated lists of these. In fact, I'm going to be giving you out one of the original, not obtainable in the United States except from me, copies of Leslie and what Leslie Cameron Bandler and Brian Vanderhorst worked up as far as a metaprogram elicitation sheet. It only has about 400 distinctions on it. One page, only about 400 to, Well, if you intersect, if you are people, self, well, the other-oriented, bless you, and so forth. You start to put them together. It gets very complicated. And they also used to ask people very unwieldy kinds of questions to try and elicit them. And then two fellows, Ross Stewart and Roger Bailey, they were very interested in business applications, simplify. And they worked up a short list, 13 questions at the time. And they were questions, so that you could hold a context constant and ask the person these questions and begin to get some answers about what were the person's leanings. Now, for what? They developed an instrument for first-line managers. That's what it was designed for. They eliminated a lot of the metaprograms to reduce it to the list of metaprograms and a couple other questions they were interested in that they thought would allow business people to suss out who would be a good first-line manager in a manufacturing enterprise. That was their purpose. Nice application, very nice application. It was very work-oriented, it was motivation-oriented, it was work-style-oriented, if you will. And then they, modeling Grinder and Bandler, of course, they had to break up. Because, of course, John and Richard worked for a while, and then they broke up. You know this, they're not working together anymore. Okay. Yeah, right. And that work languished for almost a decade. Nobody did much with it, although each of them did their own thing. Roger moved to South America, and Ross Stewart moved to Texas. And Shelley Rose Charvet, to her credit, took up the same course that I took years ago with Roger and Ross, and she packaged it and has put that forward so that now has become one of the central touchstones of what we think as metaprograms. Well, this is what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting that Shelley Rose's work, especially, again, application, directed to business, very nice stuff, very good examples about how to apply it, where to apply it, what to do with it. And having reduced the set of what's possible to understand. Other people, whether it's Wyatt Woodsmall or L. Michael Hall, have expanded the set to the point that I have to question because they brought in Jungian archetypes and they brought in spiral dynamics. And here it is. I don't know. Here's what I suggest. For something to qualify as a meta-program, you need neuro-linguistic evidence. So we've been speaking. And it needs to be a perceptual prime. Now, I'm going to give you an example of that this morning. And that's the idea of towards and away from. Now, you've heard of that, right? So tell me about this. I see something I want either in my mind's eye or in the actual world. And what is it? Attraction. Yes, we were talking about the other day. It's like, I get this feeling. So it's biological. We got the environment down, right? Yeah. And then what? I see something else. And my mind sees a little bit and goes to the big representation and goes, we're backing away. You know, I'm seeing those Harley insignia. I'm backing away. Actually, it's not true. These guys are great. But we'll say, okay, I'm backing away because this feeling of what? Repulsion, discomfort. Now, how far do I need to back up? Mentally, physically, however I do it. According to the feeling, sure. How far do I need to back up? Till the feeling diminishes to what point? Some level of comfort. Have any of you heard of the relaxation response? Okay. I'm suggesting here there may be a little bit more going on than people realize. There are two, and yes, only two neurological functions in this way. If we have what we take to be a 0 point, or relaxation, comfort response there, that there are two properties of the nervous system which are wired separately, although we tend to use them sequentially. And one of those properties is what we call the relaxation response. So the person will, what they want to do is relax their neurology. They get discomfort. People go, no, I got to take some time off. You know, or people will they'll cover their eyes. They'll try to reduce the input, right? And they go, this party's way too much for me. I'm going to go outside. You know, no, they're really having a cigarette, but they're saying, I'm going to go outside. Well, that too. You know. Relaxation response, right? So the excitation. What they're doing is they're too excited, and they're seeking to relax. And when they reach a threshold, then they, So we can say away from is, in a sense, away from a certain level of stimulation. Now, on the other side, we have the excitation response. I mean, have you ever been sitting around going, I'm bored? And even if you have kids, you know if they get bored, what do? Just stir things up, just about anything. And so people will be exciting themselves to a certain point where they like that level of excitement, where that level of excitement is familiar, or schismogenesis. Orgasm is an example of this. Just so we're clear, it's biological we're talking here. That there'll be a blow-off. They'll get so excited and relax. So people tend to, by experience, begin to be more on one side or the other side of this. They just, for whatever reasons, personal history, biological leanings, certainly combination, begin to have an orientation in life where they seek excitement or where they seek relaxation. Now, this is so well understood that you can actually, there's a guy, Joel Robertson, has written a book called Natural Prozac, and it's rather pop-oriented, but he's drawing on the research, is that you can describe depressive problems in terms of excitation or inhibition. This is known as inhibition, technically, not the relaxation response. But more to the point is, he can actually tell you what kind of food you'll eat and what kind of exercise you'll do and what your pastimes and entertainments will be based on which side of this you prefer. So we got the wine and cheese crowd out here. This is on the, what's technically known as inhibition, but which we know as relaxation. And cheese and milk products, and carbohydrates will all increase serotonin levels and increase serotonin levels, but I'm putting my hand down because there's more relaxation. So that by people are eating in certain ways or listening to soft music, Baroque music, folk music, all these things, what you're doing is you're increasing your serotonin levels and thereby having less stress, more relaxation. On the other side is dopamine, norepinephrine. This is brain. We're talking about brain chemistry here. This is what I'm saying. This is a meta program that's tied to the way the world works for us as creatures in it. Is that when we get excited, whether we want to or not, if they excite us when we don't want to be excited, we still have dopamine and norepinephrine go up. And so, running away from the saber-toothed tiger, if that ever happened, or jumping out of the way of a car when it honks at you. And also, you seek this, downhill skiing and participating in sports, even watching sports. Remember what I've told you about activating the mirror neurons, that you get enough activation watching sports, having the television on loud, having arguments, those talking heads that fight each other on TV all the time over pointless things, that stimulates dopamine and norepinephrine. It's not about the content. It's about the person getting a familiar feeling in their body and brain that they find pleasing. Now over here, the cliche, red meat eaters, hard liquors. You saw when the bikers were up here around here, they had all the signs, Jack Daniels. They just covered up the word liquor. I don't know why, maybe it was too long, but they had Jack Daniels. And so the hard liquors, the loud music, the rock and roll, the loud parties. You notice these days that all of the restaurants appear to be taking all the carpeting out and putting up pictures and stuff with glass in them so it increases the noise level? Yeah, you don't like it. Guess what we already know? Right. You like a little serotonin. A little soft music, soft lighting, conversation, intimacy, connection, maybe a salad and a glass of white wine. Still over here. Now over here, levels of excitement, right? So we got the dopamine, we've got the red meat, we've got the party that we're going to go to, and we're putting Aerosmith on the stereo kind of thing. All of those for a level of excitement that people like. Now, I hate to break it to you, apparently there's only one group of people that really gets it both ways. The leaders, the winners of elections. They did tests. Again, I don't know who pays for these studies, but they did blood samples of people in elections. And both the candidates, because we often have two candidates, we should have more, but we only have two. Both candidates were high serotonin, and they were high dopamine, norepinephrine, because of course you have to be really active to be a campaigner. And also serotonin, you look very relaxed. Very relaxed. Bill Clinton kind of thing, rock star kind of thing, high serotonin. And after the election, the serotonin levels of the loser would fall, and the winner would have high serotonin and high dopamine. CEOs, I gave another example, rock stars, yeah, leaders. Yeah, they do the, okay, another way to think about it is away from and toward, yes. But here's the thing, does that all make sense to you? So, and then we find the language that goes along with that. We find the analogs, the neurology. Somebody that goes, I want that, you know, and somebody else goes, oh, man, it's noisy, let's get out of here. So we do have the linguistic to go along with the neurology. And adding to that, though, we have this one peculiar thing, which we mentioned over here about the kids. If the kids don't have enough stimulation, they'll make some. I don't know if your father ever said something like, you're cruising for a bruising. It's a 60s thing. The idea being that we want certain levels of stimulation, and if we're not getting them, it's not necessarily about toward, any stimulation will do. What I'm suggesting is that there are two things going on here. One is inhibition and excitation. And the other is the attraction repulsion. And that they're two separate intersecting distinctions. Some other people teach this, they call it push-pull. For example, and again, Robert Dilts is a great example, is he and Richard are in a bar. And because Richard's in the bar, not because Dilts ever went to a biker bar. And Robert's there trying to explain some new idea he has to Richard. And Richard's, you know, he's having his jack, you know, and he's looking at him, and these bikers come over, and they start razzing Robert, you know, they're going, "Hey, you wussy, hey, what you doing here?" And Richard goes, you know, Richard, and we're busy, leave us alone. And so they leave Richard alone. Yeah, they come over on Robert's side, and they're like, yeah, you know, candy ass, you know, you're no bigger than my girlfriend, you know. And Richard's like, that doesn't surprise me. But, you know, so over here, Robert, like, because he's Robert, it's great. He tweaks to it, and they start talking about metaprogram differences, part of what they were doing. And they start saying, well, you know, some people, remember the thing yesterday I did with people that do things in order and people that do things out of order? It was one of those. And so Robert says, you know, and the guy goes, yeah, I do it that way. You know, and the other guy goes, well, that's stupid. And so they start to argue, and then Richard says, you know, why don't you guys take it outside? And then Robert, and they go back to what they were doing. I have a couple of points in the story. The one I want to point out is that they were seeking stimulation which was going to hurt. You'd think they'd be moving away from that. What I'm saying is I don't think our vocabulary is complete enough around this yet. There might be something like towards, away from, and maybe against. Because you think about somebody who is fighting to protect the environment, for example. Earth firsters, whether you agree with their politics or not, we know these people they go live in trees where it's not nice to live, right? And they do these things, and you couldn't say they're going for a more pleasurable experience, but they are going for higher levels of stimulation. And I would say the very same thing of people who have some cause that they're interested in, whether it's about what we think of marriage in this country or what we think of the different laws around taxation. In the same way, they're going in and they fight the good fight. And you could say they get pleasure from that, but in fact, there's a lot of slugging that goes on, a lot of, kind of personal, you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. The way people get ripped apart in these kinds of things, and their families and their values are impugned. And why would somebody go into that if we're toward pleasure and away from pain? It's towards larger purpose, then how do you account for the metaprogram? If we say, and by the way, this particular towards and away from, Thomas Hobbes, one of the greatest thinkers of the 15th century. So it's a recent distinction. And maybe I'm just saying that we've towards pleasure may not be a full description is what I'm getting at here. Yeah. And away from pain might not be a full description. What you can notice, of course, is, which would be relaxation response. Right. You see the person do that. You see they like to do that. You see that they act, they say away, they get release, relieve, relax. Then you know that they want to go in another direction. Versus someone who's going, what are we going to do? Geez, this is a one-horse town. They roll up the streets at 9:30 around here. Neurology, yeah? We know from the body movements a person is more excitation-oriented. So just a reminder this morning, these are available all the time, are happening all the time, more than one at a time. Just as you're going to take a break now and do something more than one at a time. Come back in 10 minutes.